I am massively concerned about what they call the CBDCs, the Central Bank Digital Currencies. And if they program it in a way that they say, hey, Patrick should not drink so much beer, only 2 beers allowed in a week, and after that he cannot pay for more beer. And that's what I see as a massive problem and a big threat to freedom and to humanity at the end of the day.
So, Joe, thank you so much for joining us on the Proof of Words podcast. And I have to say, this is one of the kind of interviews and conversations I'm most looking forward to, primarily because I want to dive into your book, 2024. 2024, I mean, unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to read it, but the premise sounds absolutely fascinating. Could you tell us a little bit about 2024, what its inspiration was for you to write this, and what its real world implications from your view are today?
Yes, thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm more than happy to talk about 2024, which basically is next year. And
which is horrifying to think about that. I mean, I still feel like it's 2014, and I'm just basically getting out of high school and college, right? It's amazing how time flies.
Well, my specific problem was that when I decided it should happen 40 years after 1984 from George Orwell, I realized that it is the coming year. And I was like, oh, I need to get the book done because I cannot publish a book in 25, which is called 2024. So it put a little bit pressure on myself. And the way it happened was, and what it is about is I am massively concerned about what they call the CBDCs, the Central Bank Digital Currencies. And that's not a new thing. What I'm concerned about, it's like several years. And I was writing a book. I mean, I wrote some other books. I had one of the first books in Bitcoin in German language in 2018. And so book writing is some of my passion. And I was writing a book, and I was writing and writing and writing. I'm always reading my books while I'm writing them. And I was like, this is boring. This is tech. Nobody wants to read something about the tech, how surveillance tech works. I will reach like 100 freaks and techies, but not the general public. And having this problem, I was, as it always is, under the shower. And I was like, oh man, this is like Orwell's vision coming true with CBDCs. And then it hit me and I said, why don't I write the continuation, the successor of 1984? And having that in mind, I came up with the storyline. I came up with the idea. I analyzed 1984 to the very last letter. And there is the main character in 1984, gentleman called Winston Smith. He's meets a girl and falls in love with her, Julia. And that's one of his problems he gets with the big brother is watching you guys. And eventually they caught him. And at the very end of the book, he got shot. So this 1984 is not the happy ending book.
Although I think at this point, everybody should have read 1984 by now.
Yeah, or at least should have heard about the big brothers watching you problematic. However, when he was shot, what he didn't know was that Julia was pregnant. And the baby got born on the end of 1984. And in my story, he's 40 years, he's turning 40 years, like 40 years after. He has happy lives, living in New York, working in finance on Wall Street with one of the biggest money manager in the world called Bluestone. Don't confuse it with BlackRock. It's Bluestone. It's a different.
We're just going to be very tongue in cheek on that one, yeah.
Right. So anyway, and then he also meets a girl, and you just mentioned you're heading to New York later, and you may have heard about the Katz Delicatessen. One of the most famous delis in New York. If you haven't been there, go there. It's the Katz Delicatessen. And this is actually the place where they shot the movie Harry Met Sally where she's pretending to have an orgasm in the restaurant. That's where they shot it, in the Katz Delicatessen. And I put a lot of scenes into the Katz also, where he is with his girlfriend and everything is fine until something happens. And then they get hunted down, and they get controlled. They have massive surveillance on them. And this is all done with CBDCs. And this is what I'm trying to achieve, to warn with a story people that CBDCs are very, very, very dangerous.
So, I mean, basically, it sounds like you're taking the dystopian future that George Orwell's envisioned for 1984. I mean, mind you, he wrote this book back in the 1800s, right?
No, 1947.
Okay, so the early 1900s. And this is how he envisioned the world looking 40 years down the road. Now, here we are 40 years after that. And a lot of people today will draw parallels to a lot of the programs, a lot of the bureaucracy, a lot of the surveillance, in some countries more than others, looking at like China, for instance. Even the UK is seemingly getting a little bit out of control. But a lot of people are equating this level of surveillance to what he envisioned in that dystopian future in 1984. But one of the big pieces I think that George was missing, because he just didn't have the technical foresight to see what would happen with money, is those CBDCs. And maybe if you could elaborate a little bit on, I mean, maybe what a CBDC is, in case there's people in our audience that haven't heard of what this is. And in particular, what frightens you about central bank digital currencies? What frightens you about CBDCs?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. And what you need to understand is that how money is created, and people do have central bank money in their hands already, which is typically coins and bills, because only the central bank in almost every country is allowed to print bills, dollar bills in the US, and euro bills in Europe, and coins. That is central bank money. However, as soon as you look in your online banking, in your bank account at any of the banks, it's not central bank money, but it's money created by the bank. So what typically happens is somebody deposits money in a bank account, and the bank turns around and with a quota lend it out to somebody else. But they really don't use the same amount or the same dollars, but what they do is they create credit on the lending side based on the deposits they have. So basically they create money based on the deposit they had become from somebody else. No.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that. They just assume, okay, I have $1,000, I have €1,000 in my bank account. They assume that there's $1,000 that are there. And I think the majority of the population now understands, okay, if I put $1,000 in the bank lends that $1,000 out. That's well and understood. But I think what a lot of people who don't work in finance, who don't work in banking realize is that once that $1,000 is lent out, typically it's reinvested, redeposited, I should say, back into the bank. It's then lent out again. It's then reloaned out, and then it's redeposited. And the cycle continues where inevitably you have $1,000 or you have $1,000 fungible value that was at one point deposited in the bank. And this could actually represent something to the tune of $1 million in circulating notional value of money. And that $1 million is effectively backed by absolutely nothing but the creditworthiness of the financial institution, the bank, and also the creditworthiness of the government central bank that is issuing that currency.
Exactly. But nonetheless, as long as the finance system works, it works. And if you have trouble with your bank, let's say the bank doesn't want you to be their customer anymore, they just cancel your account for whatever reason, you're free to go to a different bank, right? So you're now with Bank of America, and tomorrow you go to Wells Fargo, and the next day you go to somebody else. That's your freedom. Because there is different opportunities for you. Unless it's central bank digital money, if the accounts are run and managed by the central bank itself, then you cannot go someplace else because there is only one central bank. It's only the Federal Reserve in the United States and the European Central Bank in Europe. So that means if they cancel your account, you're done. You can't go anyplace else. And that is exactly the danger of central bank digital money, digital currency, because it's issued by the central bank. It's not a loan from your bank around the corner. It's from the central bank. And as it is digital, it can be programmed. It's programmable money issued by one centralized institution, which is the central bank, the Federal Reserve. And if they program it in a way that they say, hey, Patrick should not drink so much beer, only 2 beers allowed in a week, and after that he cannot pay for more beer or meat or whatever it is, and he cannot rent a car which has more than 150 horsepower, and he cannot, whatever it is, that can be programmed into that money. And because you don't have an alternative, you can't go to a different bank, because later all the banks will just help the central bank to manage with digital money. They can just program it in a way that you're not free anymore. You can't do what you want. And that's what I see as a massive problem and a big, big threat to freedom and to humanity at the end of the day.
So I would agree with that. And when you start thinking about the ways that central banks can become programmable, and this is kind of where China has been going for some time with their own digital yuan, and they're basically distributing it through the application WeChat over there. And they're tying it to what, at least in China, appears to be the true first real iteration of what we would call a social credit score, right?
Yes.
Where there are certain parameters you have to abide by, and you cannot be theoretically a dissenter to the Chinese Communist Party. And if you are, your money or your social credit score goes down. And because of that, you're no longer allowed to drive on the highway, pay for tolls, enter stadiums. And then on top of that, the way that they enforce it is because if your social credit score falls, you no longer can use their money to purchase anything. You can no longer use the money to go to the local grocery store to buy anything.
Yes.
And I think you articulated brilliantly there why that's a danger. Because, for instance, I'm a beer drinker. I love my beer. 2 beers a week would be disastrous for me. 2 glasses of wine would be disastrous on a weekly basis for me. Probably not great for my health. Probably overall would be. But you know what? I love wine. I love beer. We're going to go with it anyway. But it gets to be a little more frightening when you start thinking about how politicians can weaponize this. And I think that's where the real risk inevitably lies. Yes. Because if you become a political dissenter, let's say you're a little bit more right oriented and you're an American that you believe in the Second Amendment, you want to buy guns, you have a quota on how much ammunition you can buy. You have a quota on what type of gun you can buy. Right. And you know what? There's probably half the country right now that just heard me say that, and they're thinking, oh my God, CBDCs are an incredible thing. We can finally get people to stop buying guns because we can program the money to not buy guns. Yes. Well, guess what? Once that other political party gets into power, let's say it's the right side of it. Well, if you're a political dissenter, let's say you're a member of the LGBT community, and you want to participate in local pride events, and you have to use money to pay to go to the event or to pay vendors at that local LGBT event. Well, if the other side of the country is running it and they decide that they want to outlaw these types of events, well, guess what? You no longer can use your money to go to that LGBT pride event. You will no longer be able to participate with your community because you're on the political outside. So it's both the right and the left that for certain instances want this central currency because they can implement that control. And I think that's where we inevitably see CBDCs potentially being used as the ultimate weapon for tyranny.
Exactly. And it's even worse than that. It's not only that you can't buy whatever to get to an LGBT event. You can also program it in a way that it is geotagging where you are. And if you get to a certain place, it just can't pay after this border. Let's say we have a pandemic and you're only allowed, like it was in Europe, you're only allowed to leave your home for 5 kilometers or 5 miles. And if you go outside this radius, first of all, they can just block automatically all your payment opportunity, all your payment capabilities. Secondly, they can do even more. They can fine you right away, fully automatic, and say, hey, if you don't step back into the 5-mile radius, you'll be fined $100, which we just deduct from your account. Easy. And if you don't obey, we get $100 now, and half an hour later, we take $1,000, and an hour later, if you still don't obey, we will just cancel your whole account, and you're penniless. You cannot pay with nothing anymore. That's what they can do. So they not only have a controlling instrument, or they not only have a surveillance instrument, they also have a brutal control instrument. And the two scenarios from the both sides of the spectrum is exactly what can happen. And it's easy for them to do it, because here's the big news about the difference of 1984 and my book 2024, which I'm just holding in the camera so that people get an idea how the cover looks. Then George Orwell wrote it in 1947, 48. It was published in 49. He had to think about the future technology, and he invented a televisor, which was kind of a TV, which could also look and see. So he had to think forward technology. CBDCs, all technology you need is here already and can be enabled today. Writing that book, I didn't have to think what technology we'll have in 10, 20, or 30 years. No, it's all there. So the parts of the weapon is already there, and they are at the moment assembling it, ready to shoot everybody who does not obey the rules, whatever the rules are. It may be left, it may be right, it may be something totally different, like it happened in Europe around about 90 years ago, when Hitler came into power. He was, and this is something people need to understand, he was becoming chancellor on January 30th, 1933. And on March 24th, less than 8 weeks later, the total party power was enabled, and it was a totalitarian system out of a democratic system before. So he got a dictator within 7 weeks after being democratically elected. And if that happens today, no matter where, the CBDC availability is so fast, and it's so dramatic, and it's so dangerous. And therefore, I'm pleading that we need to do everything to make sure nobody is ever creating CBDCs as we're planning it today.
So how do we stop what would be that CBDC? Because I think there's two elements at play here. Number one, a lot of people would argue, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. I don't believe any of these things, but I'm just going to go down this rabbit hole. A lot of people would argue that CBDCs help ease the friction between member banks of the central bank, right? And that's one of the merits of a CBDC, that it eases that friction, allows for ease of processing. It is a better way to track liquidity levels at banks. It allows the central bank to govern the banks that it regulates a little bit better, which, okay, fine. That actually sounds like a good, reasonable argument for CBDCs on the nose. Further, I mean, at the end of the day, we already really use digital money. I mean, in Germany, it might be a little bit different, although COVID actually changed that. I remember when I first moved to Germany, this was 8 or 9 years ago, I couldn't believe that a lot of the local restaurants I would go to still would only accept cash. It just made no sense to me whatsoever. Now, COVID changed that, and pretty much everywhere in Germany now accepts credit card. They'll accept debit cards more predominantly. But if, at least in the United States, even you have these banking applications, PayPal, Venmo, etc. Germany, N26, it's a neobank, right?
Right.
It's a digitally focused neobank.
Right.
The money is already digital. So I think a lot of people, they hear CBDC and they don't take the next step of logic of what is now currently already digital money. I mean, it's money on my TD Bank app on my phone. Why do I care that it's now a CBDC instead of what already is digital money? And I think that similar to the argument that there's ease of use between the central bank and the member banks, the security that comes with that digital money in the existing banking system, plus what will be very simple usage of it, simplicity, the same way PayPal and Venmo are simple. I think a lot of people will opt for that simplicity,
right?
Just because it's easily available, rather than articulate or even want or try to think about the theoretical, tyrannical implications that you and I are implying.
Right.
How do we reach those people? Well, so first off, how do we engage? Because I think a CBDC is relatively inevitable. I think that it is going to happen, unfortunately. How do we, A, potentially implement them in a responsible way, or even better, can it be implemented in a responsible way? Or B, how, if it is implemented, how do we make sure that people understand what it can lead to or how it can be stopped?
Right. That's a whole set of questions. And I'd like to address firstly that there are two different CBDCs. One is the wholesale CBDC and the other one is the retail CBDC. And the efficiency in the banking system, if the Fed is using a CBDC for the interbanking market between the member banks and every other bank, that's a wholesale CBDC. And they should use it just to have a more efficient way. So that's basically an intra-banking payment system, which is fine. I don't have any problem with that. And
this is really more M1, M2 money supply when you think about it. That's wholesale banking.
Yeah, right. What I do have a problem with is with retail CBDC, which is issued by a central issuer, in that case, the Federal Reserve, to the people on the street, to you and me and everybody else. And as long as this is not the only currency, the CBDC, but also we have PayPal and Venmo and a million others, then we have a currency competition, and users will use the most easy, most convenient, most strong application. But if the central bank, and this is also then a political decision, will not allow these other competitors to be around, then we're getting into a centralized, controlled situation. And in order not to get in this situation, we should make sure that central bank digital currencies will be delayed as long as it takes in order to get up an alternative payment system which nobody can control. And the good news is there is already one which is called Bitcoin, and that has the features that nobody can control it, not even the central bank in the world. If they all collaborate, if they have all the military in the world, if they have every soldier in the world, they still cannot manipulate it. However, Bitcoin is like very, very tiny small right now. And we need to make it into mass adoption so that people, on the day the Fed says, okay, now you cannot use Venmo anymore, you cannot use PayPal anymore, and all the banks are controlled by us, and we have the retail CBDC, and now you, Patrick, we can switch off your payment abilities, that then at that day in the future, you can say, I don't even care, I just pay with Bitcoin, because you can't control that. So this is what we need. We need a plan B. So the idea is, and I'm totally with you, it's inevitable that the CBDCs will come. And I hope to delay them for another 5, maybe 10 years until Bitcoin is strong enough so that the people in the world have a plan B, that they have an alternative and they are not depending on the CBDCs like they do a little bit in China already, which is very scary if you look over there.
And that's one of the primary reasons why I'm a Bitcoiner. I understand that a lot of people are Bitcoiners now because of the mantra of being this digital gold, of being this hard money. And that's one of the value drivers. Two of the value drivers of Bitcoin. But for me, Bitcoin being intermediary list, Bitcoin being censorship resistance, is really probably the most beneficial attribute that Bitcoin has. And in the West, we don't have experience with that type of level of tyranny, at least over the last 90 years or so, right?
Right.
I mean, there have been presidents that some would say have been a little bit tyrannical. I mean, the media sensationalizes everything. Over the last 4 presidencies in the United States, certain elements of the media would have called Bush, Obama, Trump, and now Biden tyrannical in a certain capacity. And there's merits to that in certain instances. But when we think about it from what really could be implemented via CBDC, which is what's effectively happening in China now, it is nowhere near the scale of tyrannical practice. It is nowhere near the scale of tyrannical control that can be implemented. And that's what really horrifies me, because the flip side of this is when you start to think about the way the CBDC can be implemented from a traditional retail perspective. I mean, I don't know exactly how they would be rolling it out, but I think it will largely be done via employers, where if you are an employer in a state, you're an employer in a jurisdiction, you will, the same way, at least in the United States, I'm not exactly sure how it happened in Europe, but I mean, in the United States, federal taxation is technically unconstitutional. It just legally is. They had to do amendments and make all these changes to do it. But even then, what a lot of people in the United States don't know is you're not actually required to necessarily file a tax return. You're not necessarily required to file anything. It's completely voluntary. Okay. Well, then the question is, well, how do you force taxation? Well, you do it through employers. Employers, to get a business license, have to agree to withhold the income from salaries for these individuals. So my hypothesis of how I think they're going to go about doing this is they're going to force it through employers. They're going to enforce it through the tech companies. So you're automatically going to have your CBDC, your digital dollars, your digital euros withheld for tax purposes, which, okay, fine. That actually might make friction. That'll create a more frictionless tax environment. And while I think taxation is theft, if it's going to at least exist, and we're going to exist in a world where there's taxation in perpetuity, I believe, well, okay, removing that friction through a CBDC, that sounds interesting enough. That's a net positive, arguably. However, you're already going to be forced into that CBDC ecosystem. You're going to have to download an app and you're going to have the CBDC and therefore be subject to all the other elements of programmability. And what's even more horrifying, it was the former Bank of England head. And he got famous in a quote because it got circulated on the Joe Rogan show, I believe. And he was talking about one of the benefits of programmability is that not just the governments, but employers would soon be able to decide how that money that they earn through the salaries employees would be able to spend. Yes. And when you start to think about woke culture, when you start to think about far right culture, well, okay, those companies that maybe are a little bit more woke on the tech side or maybe are a little bit more conservative on the right side, well, they're going to program what people can be spending their money on. And when you start thinking about that, it gets even more horrifying.
Yes. But I don't see this as the first steps they would do, because forcing something is always the second option. Why not having the people volunteer with joy? Because, hey, you get a 20% discount if you use CBDC.
So I think they'll do that. And I think they're going to do helicopter money as well, too.
Yes.
And I don't think it's forcing it if you do it. I mean, it is forcing it if you do it through employers, but it's not, okay, we're going to beat you over the head until you do it. It's just going to be a seamless transition. Download an application on your phone. Right. When you download that application, you're going to have 1,000 CBDC waiting there for you. Congratulations. You're going to tie your digital identity to it. And oh, by the way, 10 to 20% discount in any purchase using the CBDC for the first year that you use it, right?
Exactly.
And then, oh, by the way, maybe you get a 5% reduction on income tax. You no longer have to pay your FEMA or your FICA tax. And it's not going to be withheld for the first year if you opt in to using an employer or having your employer pay you in CBDC. So there's going to be a lot of ways that they're going to helicopter this in, the same way they used helicopter money in COVID to get everyone comfortable with the lockdowns at the time.
Right. And another
but how
good
do we
way,
fight against that?
Right. Another good way which they could and will do is what they did in Venezuela, creating a fake money, kind of digital central bank thing, which called the Petro, which is just fake, just cryptocurrency fake. But what they do with the Petro is they just pay all the social payments and the rent payments, not the rent, what is it called? Retirement payments to
like
the retirees.
Yeah.
So they only get their retirement payment in this Petro. Now, because the Petro fucked up so badly, sorry for the words, but I happen to...
we curse on here all the time. Fuck it.
I happen to know people there, and I know of a judge, a former judge, and she's now retired. And because of the Petro, she now gets the retirement $23. Roughly. And this is 23, yes, $23 in the Petro money. So she can't even buy any food anymore. That's the situation there. And this is done with not CBDCs like we talk about, but similar. It's like a scam from the beginning because this is like, but that's the way they could go and they will go. It's just like, hey, your retirement money, we'll do it right in your app. Very easy. You get it right away. You don't have to cash checks. You don't have, just in your app. And combined with all these other benefits, people will fall for it. And that's going to be a very, very tough time in the future.
And what's worse is they'll probably program it that it is not able to be fungible, with Bitcoin being the alternative. So while I agree with you, they can't kill Bitcoin, they can limit access to Bitcoin. There is a world where that can theoretically happen, and I hope that we don't see it. But I mean, what are the alternatives therein, or how can people recognize that they're all alternatives? Or do you think this is going to be a completely closed ecosystem and that's game over?
No. What I think is that Bitcoin is getting more wider adoption. People will get to know Bitcoin, will play around with it, will get the first Satoshis, which is 100 millions of a Bitcoin, and will get used to it. And if the time comes that they need it, they will know about it and they will get there. Now, can they buy Bitcoin at the time? If the CBDCs prevent that from happening, it will be tough. But you can always earn Bitcoin. So if you have somebody who's employing you, and it may be worldwide, like we pay people all the time in Bitcoin sitting in Asia doing some services for us. So you pay with Bitcoin. So the Bitcoin economy needs to start and grow. Right now, it's very tiny, but I hope that all our efforts, and that's one of the reasons also I wrote the book to open the eyes of the people, say, hey, you need to be careful. And if you can't circumvent it, then at least you need to know about plan B. That is Bitcoin. So it's a timing question. If they move very, very fast, like in the next 2 years, we have a problem. But I don't see that. I don't see also, like I always in Germany, and people in the United States don't know that. But in Germany, we had a great plan in building a new airport in Berlin. And
I know the story.
It was scheduled for, 3 years and something like $5 billion. And it took them 15 years. So my hope, and of course, like 10 times the money. My hope is that even they want to do it, they're not able to do it. They just can't pull it off because it's too much a big project. So that gives us maybe the lead time to get alternatives out. And but we need to educate people. We need to inform people. And this was the reason why I refrained from writing the book, the technology book, which I was in the middle of already, and was thinking about a story. And I think a story is something people can relate to, and you can tell it other people. And being on the shoulders of giants, as they say, which is George Orwell here, I have something like where I can build on and show people this was a dystopian science fiction at Orwell. But today we do have all the technologies right there. We don't need to wait. They can implement it today if they can.
Well, I hope, one of the things I've learned being in Germany, particularly with that Berlin story, is that the German efficiency is just a lie. Germans love paperwork. Germans love bureaucracy probably more than anybody. And you know what? Hey, it works there. Sometimes everything is ticked and tied. All the T's are crossed. All the I's are dotted. It works. It just works very, very painfully slow with every procedure. I question, though, if that will be the case with CBDCs. Because there is, if we're thinking about this new world order, and the World Economic Forum and a bunch of politicians, they talk about this and they talk about the needs for CBDCs as a part of that vision for that new world, this more equitable world. I think this is something that they're pushing for maybe a little bit more fast, than maybe some of the other things that are out there. And it does seem a bit more coordinated, if not maybe just completely hypothetical for the time being. But on the other side, you see some pretty noteworthy politicians, such as Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy, both political candidates, and RFK Jr. On the Democrat side. All three of these individuals have come out against CBDCs for various reasons. But either way, you do see some political opposition to this, bipartisan political opposition. Right. Do you think that there is a grassroots movement? Do you think there is a political movement that can stop CBDCs? Or maybe even a more interesting question to ask, can implement CBDCs in such a way that it cannot be used as a completely tyrannical financial instrument? Do you see a world where that CBDC could exist?
Well, that is one of the big lies of the, at least, European Central Bank. Ms. Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, by the way, a criminal, legally charged with criminal behavior in France. And she now runs around and tells that CBDCs will not be programmable.
That's not true.
My question is,
they're going to be private?
My question is, how can a digital program, which is acting as a CBDC and its software, how can that not be programmable, as it is by nature a program, a software? So these are the lies getting out of the mouth of the EZB, which I think it's just unbelievable. Anyway, so they can be programmable.
You don't see as much opposition in Europe, I think, to the CBDC as you see in the United States. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, there is no opposition yet, but that is because people don't understand CBDCs, people don't understand finance, people don't understand money. And we have some people now getting into it, some parties, but not as strong as in the United States. And my hope is that they cannot, because it's a software, they are not able to get it off the ground as fast as they want it. And then the next thing is, of course, the laws need to be changed. Before we have this dystopian future, like in 2024, laws have to be changed. And this is a little tricky in Europe more than in the United States, because in Europe, you have like with 29 countries, and the EU Parliament can issue something, but then it needs an implementation time of another maybe 2 years or 3 years. So all of this may lead to an extra 5 years, hopefully. And the political pushback in the United States may also lead to another 5 to 10 years. At the end of the day, we will have CBDCs in one or the other way, and they will be programmable. And if somebody with bad intentions will get the finger on the knobs, on the switches, they will turn the switches. But this may be 5-10 years, and I hope that Bitcoin then is, everybody knows about Bitcoin, and this could be our plan B. This will be our plan B.
I mean, that's what Bitcoin is to me, but I think Bitcoin can become so much more. At least for me, Bitcoin is the most perfect form of money that humanity has yet conceived. And it's become that perfect form of money. Because it solved two of the issues of the blockchain trilemma that we're all familiar with, decentralization and security. Bitcoin, it's not 100% decentralized. Nothing is, but it has perfected that as much as humanly possible
No.
today.
It is 100% decentralized. I totally disagree. It's 100% decentralized. There is no way you can manipulate the blockchain. No way.
I agree with that entirely, but there are theoretical ways it could happen, but it won't happen for financial and economic reasons. Game theory just dictates it can't happen. But nonetheless, it is perfect in decentralization and security. Right. And now you have layer 2 solutions like Lightning, which, Lightning creates a little bit more centralization, as does all protocols from a layer 2 perspective, but still has Bitcoin as the core layer, right?
I totally disagree again. Lightning is even more decentralized than Bitcoin. I mean, 100% both. And Lightning has the opportunity also, or the special feature that it's getting into anonymous transfer of money, which you don't have in the Bitcoin blockchain.
So I'm speaking with centralization, where I believe that like long-term Lightning, it is difficult to set up your own Lightning channels. I mean, yes, it is a peer-to-peer payment channel. If you and I wanted to transact, we can set up a payment channel and it will work. Right. I think it's largely going to be the exchanges. That's why Coinbase and Binance and all of these groups are setting up their own Lightning nodes with their own channels. People are going to go through the Binance and the Coinbases of the world to transact in Lightning. I hope it doesn't work that way. It hasn't yet worked that way, but I suspect that it might. And that way it does become a little bit more centralized around those services, the same way that I would argue that all of the mining operators, all of the mining pools, they're not centralizing Bitcoin, but it does create more layers of centralization, not necessarily around Bitcoin itself, but around the services, around the harvesting of the financial upside of Bitcoin in that ecosystem.
Well, I don't agree with that, because I have Lightning nodes running here, and I can send you Lightning right now without any Coinbases or any other big players. And if my payment to you decides that routing through Coinbase is the fastest and the most convenient way, it will do, and Coinbase doesn't know anything about it. And if Coinbase then is turning evil and switching off the Lightning node they have, my payment doesn't give a shit, because it just goes a different route. So there is no centralization in that thing. There is only players, and the more players, the more efficient the whole system works. So I invite everybody to be its own Lightning node, and this is like a $50 piece of computer. You just set it up.
But that's the complexity. I don't think. So I agree with you entirely on what you just said, but most people are not going to set up their own Lightning node. Most people are not going to set up their channels. They're going to have to be reliant on these platforms. And while people that are more familiar with the technology, like you and I, we're comfortable doing that, but the average user, and that's what we talk about when we talk about adoption, right? The person that just wants to go to their phone, push a button 3 times, and hey, maybe not even Satoshis, but $10 worth gets sent somewhere else. They're not going to engage with the tech. They're not going to open their payment channels. They're not going to run a node.
Right.
And that's maybe more what I mean around the centralization of it, if that makes sense.
But look at that. We talk about 5 to 10 years. If we can delay the central bank digital monies for another 5 to 10 years, I think it's highly likely that in 1 year or 2 years, mobile phones can be Lightning nodes. The tech is already
a wonderful world to live in.
Exactly. And that would be decentralized. So this massive decentralization, the only way you then could stop it is you just cut off the phone from the network, from the cell network. Well, then you go Wi-Fi. You don't give a shit. You just go Wi-Fi. Then they cut off the Wi-Fi. And hey, what happened? Well, they cut off the internet. But do you think if they cut off the internet, they care about Lightning and Bitcoin? They have so much bigger problems with no having internet around the world than Bitcoin and Lightning. Yeah. So this is like, if we get the Bitcoin tech onto the mobile phones so that we have nodes millions and tens of millions of nodes. Lightning will go like lightning speed, fast transactions.
Oh, and that's why they have the name, right?
Exactly. And this is something people I'd like to talk about, and I like people to know. If you want to have more transaction on the PayPal or the Visa network, they need to install a totally new server farm. Mm-hmm. In order to get from 40,000 transactions per second to 50,000, they need to invest in tens of thousands of computers. In Lightning, we have an exponential curve. If you put several more nodes, you get from 40 to 50,000, and you get from 50 to 500,000 transactions per second. And the next step is to 5 million transactions per second. So if this tech, with Lightning and Bitcoin is so scalable, with such an increasing capacity, with each node adding to it, that if we have only like 0.1% of all cell phones enabled as nodes, Visa, PayPal, they're all done. They don't have any right to exist anymore.
I mean, and I think Visa and PayPal and MasterCard, these guys are smart enough. Behind closed doors and even to a certain extent publicly, they're tinkering with Bitcoin. They're tinkering with Lightning. They realize what a threat this is. Yes. And my hope is that we don't live in a world where, because of these corporate lobbyists, these types of technologies become either A, regulated out of fashion, or B, create such regulatory barriers to entry that it's almost impossible for Lightning payment providers and others to challenge the Visas and the MasterCards. Rather, I would like to see a world where Visa and MasterCard are interoperating with the Lightning network, where they are actually enabling Bitcoin. And I think if you play game theory a little bit, I mean, we can agree you can't kill Bitcoin. It's impossible. You can't stop it. So then the only logical conclusion is you have to fall to consensus and just openly embrace it and do, I think, whatever you humanly can to build a business model or to innovate your business model in and around Bitcoin and Lightning. Because if you don't, and you try to play the prisoner's dilemma and you rat your buddy out, well, you're probably dead. You're not, your buddy went to consensus. You're dead.
What I used to, it's maybe a German expression, but what I'm saying is that if you embrace it, you are the number one. If you don't, you're number two. But always remember, number two is always the first loser.
That's a very, very good way to say it. So, I mean, just in the interest of time, I know you have to get running shortly. What do you see? So you've already written this book, 2024, and it paints an even further dystopian view based on technology that is available today for what might be happening in the relative near future. Outside of the CBDC element that we've been looking to here, what are you looking at in 2024 that maybe was not captured in the dystopian element the same way a CBDC wasn't captured in 1984, that your book addresses that seemingly is being implemented in the real world?
Well, I was focusing on the CBDC, but the threat, of course, is surveillance. If you look around, all the surveillance systems are upgrading all the time, more cameras, more ways to control where you are, what you do. You have all this tracking stuff. And I think this is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we also need to understand that we do have a spy in our pocket. Mm-hmm. And whenever you run around with your cell phone, whenever you do something with your cell phone, it may be a call, it may be a post, it may be a video or an audio, whatever it is, you being tracked. And the more the companies and surveillance runners have data, they can enrich the data points and make it bigger, 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 so that at the end of the day, you be a person totally known from head to toe. And this is a very scary situation for me too. This is why I don't use a lot of services anymore. For example, I never try to log onto Google with anything relevant, just stuff which I don't care about. And sometimes I'm leaving the house without the cell phone and just make sure that nobody knows what I'm doing and where I am. So I think this consciousness about surveillance needs to grow more and faster than the surveillance itself grows, which is really, really fast.
And I do believe that we've started to see some pushback given what has transpired over the last 2 or 3 years related to censorship of information, related to the doxing of people that were calling out clear fallacies around the COVID pandemic, the vaccine, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that, I don't know, with every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And there have been elements of that coming to play. So I do think that that is a very cognizant topic. I mean, I can give you an example of just over the weekend. So I was in Philadelphia with my family over the weekend, and I was on the phone with my wife, who is currently back in Germany. She'll be joining us in a couple of days here. And we had a tropical storm that was coming through. The East Coast just got absolutely drenched, 2 or 3 days of just torrential downpour that came through. And I remember I was on the phone with my wife, and we were just talking, and she was asking, well, okay, what are your plans for the weekend? Are you staying in New York, or are you going to go see your mom and dad? And I said, well, there's a hurricane, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to go golfing. And wouldn't you know it, immediately Siri on my damn Apple Watch goes, actually, that is false news or fake news. There is no hurricane this weekend. It's a tropical storm.
Really?
I was like, are you fucking kidding me? We're arguing semantics at that point, which is really just an arbitrary measure of wind speed, right? So, okay, fine. Yeah, there's not a hurricane. I misspoke and we call it a tropical storm, but still it was just absolutely absurd that the Apple Watch Siri was listening to me in real time. And the second I said something that was factually incorrect, which I did, I misspoke, it corrected me in real time without even ever prompting it. That's just horrifying that's absolutely happening on every device that you have in your home.
Yeah, but why didn't you? My Siri is disabled at all the devices. I don't have Alexa. I don't have Cortana, whatever the name is. I just to stay out of all this as much as possible. My problem is I walk on the street and I have a camera watching me. And
so my logic is that even if I disable Siri, she's still running in the background. I can't prove it, and I know other people can't prove it, but I'm assuming it's listening anyway. I remember a few years ago, my business partner and we were talking about a protein shake, a very specific type of protein shake that I had never heard of before. It was some new German brand. And wouldn't you know it, just having a conversation about it for 30 seconds, I start getting inundated with Huel advertisements on Facebook and Google just immediately after. And I know I didn't have any devices listening at the time. So my logic is the only way to do this is you have to get rid of the devices entirely, because I genuinely believe they're listening in the background, even if you disable it.
Yeah. I follow you. I cannot prove it, but so what I do is, for example, I'm just always Googling for pregnant stuff pregnant women need. I Google that, and then I get all this information about pregnancy and so on. And hey, I'm not pregnant, that's for sure. And so I know exactly what's going on, and I just disregard it. And one of the things I always
but men can get pregnant now. Didn't you know that? And that's the new thing.
No, I didn't know that. There's a joke. There's a joke in Munich, especially because we have the European Patent Office in Munich, and there is a joke that 2 men walk by the street, and one of them is pregnant. Where do they go? What is their target they're going to? Well, we are going to the European Patent Office because that's like one of them is pregnant, you know. But anyway, so one of my recommendation, and I truly believe that, is get yourself a VPN, a virtual private network application,
100%,
and make sure you never use the internet without that. My problem is I always use it, and I'm always being in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. The disadvantage is all the advertisement I get to see is in Dutch language, and I have no idea what it is all about. So So that's the
I
funny
mean, I'll
thing.
actually say I don't mind some of the advertisements. I've actually bought a few products that
you
it was
did?
an advertisement popped up on my Twitter. And you know what? I was like, okay, that looks cool. I'll go and I'll buy it. But yeah, I've had the same problem. I have I usually use like a Swiss or a German VPN.
Right.
Frankfurt more normally because they have the servers there, right? And I mean, I can't speak a lick of German, even though I live there. So it is what it is. Anyways, Joe, really appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. And your book is available in English, to be sure, correct?
Not yet. No, not yet. It's in the process. I just have a last round of readings and it will be available, let's say November this year.
I'm going to have to pick myself up a copy as soon as the English version is available. I look forward to reading it.
Yeah, I'll give you a notice. And thank you so much for having me here. It was quite an interesting conversation. And I hope that a lot of people will watch and will understand CBDCs are really dangerous. The most dangerous thing ever invented, in my personal view. And if you just don't believe me, read the book. It shows scenarios which are so much worse than the ones we talked about. And it can happen. So be careful.
What's more horrifying is there are factions within the world that are going to try to make sure that it does happen. And that's a horrifying thought. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. We'll definitely try to get you back on. Have a good one.
Thank you so much. And you have a great time.